The crowd gathered on the courthouse steps fell silent as the auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden block, a sound that echoed through the dusty streets of Muskogee, Oklahoma, like a gunshot in the still autumn air of 1879. Dahlia Fairchild clutched her 3-month-old daughter Emma to her chest, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might burst. Tears threatened, but she blinked them away, refusing to show weakness before the sea of unfamiliar faces that had come to bid on what remained of her life. "Next up, folks," the auctioneer announced, his voice booming across the town square, "the Fairchild estate debts. Includes the widow herself, a fine housekeeper, I'm told, and her infant daughter. Bidding starts at $80 to cover outstanding debts to the bank." Dahlia shivered despite the warm September sun beating down on her head. Just 2 weeks ago, she'd been Mrs. Thomas Fairchild, wife to one of the most promising young cattle ranchers in the territory. Now she was a widow with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back and the baby in her arms. Thomas had been found dead on the trail back from Kansas City, his body stripped of valuables, including the money from his cattle sale. Without that money, the bank had foreclosed on their small ranch, and now they were selling off everything including her labor to cover the debts. $80, called a gravelly voice from the crowd. Dahlia's gaze darted to the source, Hank Prescott, owner of the town saloon. His eyes raked over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "90, countered another voice. Luther Maxwell, the elderly shopkeeper. Slightly better, but she'd heard he worked his help to the bone for pennies. The bidding continued, the amount rising slowly. Dahlia felt like a prized heifer being sold at market. Her daughter whimpered against her chest, sensing her mother's distress. 120, called Prescott again, a smug smile on his face. The auctioneer nodded, scanning the crowd. $120 going once. $500. The crowd gasped collectively and parted like the Red Sea, revealing a tall figure standing at the back. Dahlia squinted against the sun to make him out. Yates McKinnon stood with his hat in his hands, dust from the trail still clinging to his clothes. His face was tanned and weathered beneath a shock of dark hair, his expression unreadable as he stepped forward. Dahlia knew him only by reputation, a cowboy who'd ridden with Thomas on cattle drives, owned a small spread north of town. A loner who rarely came to town except for supplies. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. $500. Sir, the debt is only, you heard me. McKinnon's voice was firm, brooking no argument. $500 to clear the debt and leave something for the widow besides. Now see here, Prescott began to protest, but McKinnon silenced him with a look. Any other bids? The auctioneer called, his gaze sweeping the suddenly quiet crowd. When no one spoke, he struck his gavel. Sold to Yates McKinnon for $500. McKinnon strode forward, pulling a leather pouch from his vest. He counted out the bills methodically while Dahlia watched in stunned silence. When the transaction was complete, he turned to her, those deep blue eyes meeting hers for the first time. "Mrs. Fairchild," he said quietly, tipping his hat. "If you'll gather your things, we'll be leaving. You're coming home." Dahlia's mouth went dry. "Home," she managed to whisper. "Yes, madam," McKinnon replied, his voice softening just slightly. "Not to worry. I've got a place for you and your little one. It's not much, but it's better than." His eyes flickered toward Prescott, who was glaring at them both. Dahlia clutched Emma closer. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Something flashed in McKinnon's eyes, regret, perhaps, or determination. "I owed Thomas," he said simply, "and no one deserves what was about to happen to you." With that, he reached for her small carpet bag containing what few possessions the bank had allowed her to keep. "My wagon's out front. We should go before the sun gets much higher." Dahlia hesitated only a moment. Whatever awaited her with this solemn cowboy, it had to be better than the fate Prescott had planned for her. She nodded once and followed McKinnon down the courthouse steps, acutely aware of the townspeople's stares burning into her back. McKinnon's wagon was weathered but well-maintained, hitched to two sturdy horses. He helped her up onto the seat, careful not to disturb the sleeping Emma, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. As the wagon pulled away from Muskogee, Dahlia looked back at the town where she'd come as a bride just 15 months ago, full of hopes for the future. Now those dreams lay in ruins, and she was heading toward an unknown destiny with a man she barely knew. "Mr. McKinnon," she said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly a mile. "I want to thank you for what you did back there, but I need to know what exactly am I to you now? Your servant. She couldn't bring herself to say the word. McKinnon's hands tightened on the reins. "Neither," he said firmly. "You're a free woman, Mrs. Fairchild. I meant what I said about owing Thomas. He saved my life once, and I couldn't save his." He glanced at her briefly. "I've got a small ranch about 10 miles north. There's a cabin on the property used to belong to my foreman before he got married and moved on. It needs some work, but it's yours for as long as you need it. I won't bother you none." Relief flooded through Dahlia, making her light-headed. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," McKinnon replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Just doing what's right." As the wagon rumbled on through the golden prairie, Dahlia felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest, a tiny flicker of hope, as fragile as a newborn flame. The journey to McKinnon's ranch took nearly 3 hours, the wagon trundling steadily northward along a rutted trail that eventually branched off from the main road. Emma woke halfway there, fussing from hunger. Dahlia fed her discreetly, grateful that McKinnon kept his eyes fixed firmly on the trail ahead, giving her what privacy he could. "Just over that rise," McKinnon said finally, nodding toward a gentle slope ahead. "That's my spread." As they crested the hill, Dahlia caught her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The main house was modest but solid-looking, built of timber with a broad porch wrapping around 2 sides. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. About 100 yards from the main house stood a smaller cabin, smoke rising lazily from its chimney. "Someone's at the cabin," she observed, anxiety creeping back into her voice. "That'd be Mrs. Gunderson," McKinnon explained. "She comes in from town twice a week to cook and clean for me. I sent word ahead that you'd be coming. She's likely airing the place out and getting it ready." As they approached, Dahlia could see it was a simple one-room cabin with a lean-to addition on the back. A clothesline had been strung between 2 posts, and fresh linens flapped in the breeze. McKinnon drew the wagon to a halt between the 2 dwellings. Almost immediately, the cabin door opened, and a stout woman with iron-gray hair emerged, wiping her hands on her apron. "You made it back then," she called to McKinnon, her keen eyes immediately finding Dahlia and the baby. "This the widow Fairchild, Mrs. Gunderson. This is Mrs. Dahlia Fairchild and her daughter Emma," McKinnon said, jumping down from the wagon. "Mrs. Fairchild, Ingrid Gunderson. Best cook in 3 counties and knows more about ranching than most men twice her age. Mrs. Gunderson snorted at this but looked pleased. "Come on down, Mrs. Fairchild. I've got the cabin all set for you. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and sound." McKinnon helped Dahlia down from the wagon, then reached for her bag. "I'll bring your things. Mrs. Gunderson can show you around." The older woman took Dahlia's arm and led her toward the cabin. "You look dead on your feet, girl. Come sit down before you fall down." The interior of the cabin was simple but, as promised, clean and welcoming. A cast iron stove occupied one corner, a small table and 2 chairs stood in another. A narrow bed with a fresh quilt was pushed against the far wall, and a cradle obviously newly made sat beside it. Dahlia's eyes filled with tears at the sight of the cradle. "Did you?" "The cradle. That was Mr. McKinnon," Mrs. Gunderson said, her voice softening. "Been working on it since he got word about your husband. Finished it just yesterday." Dahlia turned to find McKinnon standing awkwardly in the doorway, her carpet bag in his hand. "You made this for Emma," he shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Figured the little one would need somewhere proper to sleep." Mrs. Gunderson cleared her throat. "There's stew on the stove and bread cooling on the table. Pantry stocked with basics. Outhouse is out back, and I've drawn water for washing up." She patted Dahlia's arm. "I'll leave you to settle in. I come Tuesdays and Fridays, but you send word if you need anything before then." After the older woman left, an awkward silence fell between Dahlia and McKinnon. "The lean-to's got a washtub," he said finally, "and there's a lock on both doors inside and out." "You'll be safe here." Dahlia nodded, emotion clogging her throat. "Thank you, Mr. McKinnon, for everything." He set her bag down beside the bed. "Yates," he said quietly. "My name's Yates." "Yates," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. He nodded once, then turned to go. At the door, he paused. "If you need anything, you can find me at the main house. I won't. I mean to say, you have your privacy here. This place is yours now." After he left, Dahlia sank onto the edge of the bed, cradling Emma against her chest. For the first time in 2 weeks, she allowed herself to weep not just for Thomas, or for the life she had lost, but also from sheer relief that she and her daughter would not be separated, would not be at the mercy of men like Hank Prescott. And perhaps, though she hardly dared admit it even to herself, she also wept a little from the unexpected kindness of a solemn cowboy with gentle hands who had built a cradle for a baby he didn't know. The first week on McKinnon's ranch passed in a blur of adjustment and grief. Dahlia spent most of it within the confines of the small cabin, venturing out only to hang laundry or fetch water from the pump. True to his word, Yates kept his distance, though she occasionally caught glimpses of him working with his small crew of cowhands or riding out at dawn to check on his herd. On her 3rd day there, she'd woken to find a crate of fresh eggs and a quart of milk on her doorstep. The following morning, there had been a basket of early fall apples. No note accompanied these gifts, but she knew who had left them. By the beginning of her 2nd week, Dahlia began to feel the walls of the cabin closing in on her. Emma was thriving, growing plumper by the day on her mother's milk, but Dahlia herself felt listless and useless. All her life, she'd been active, first helping on her father's farm as a girl, then managing her own household after marrying Thomas. On Tuesday, Mrs. Gunderson arrived as usual, arms full of supplies from town. "You're looking peaky," the older woman announced after studying Dahlia's face. "Need to get some fresh air and purpose, that's what." Dahlia sighed, bouncing Emma gently as the baby fussed. "I don't want to impose any further on Mr. McKinnon's charity." Mrs. Gunderson snorted. "Charity? Girl, have you seen the state of his house? Man lives like a bachelor because he is one. Shirts need mending. Garden's gone half to seed since I don't have time for it, what with keeping the house and cooking." She fixed Dahlia with a stern look. "I'm not suggesting you work for free. Talk to him about earning your keep if your pride's bothering you." The idea took root in Dahlia's mind. That evening, after putting Emma down in her cradle, she gathered her courage and walked the short distance to the main house. Lights glowed in the windows, and she could see Yates's silhouette as he moved about inside. She hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly uncertain. What if he misunderstood her intentions? But no, in the short time she'd known him, Yates McKinnon had shown himself to be honorable to a fault. Taking a deep breath, she climbed the steps and knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence, then footsteps approached. The door swung open to reveal Yates, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a book in his hand. He looked surprised to see her. "Mrs. Fairchild, is everything all right, the baby?" "Emma's fine," she assured him quickly. "She's sleeping. I." Now that she was here, the words seemed to stick in her throat. "May I speak with you for a moment?" He stepped back immediately, opening the door wider. "Of course. Please come in." The interior of the house was neat but sparse, a testament to Mrs. Gunderson's efforts rather than any attempt at homemaking. The furniture was functional rather than comfortable, and there were no decorative touches to soften the masculine atmosphere. "Can I offer you some coffee or tea, perhaps?" Yates asked, setting his book aside. "No, thank you." Dahlia remained standing, twisting her hands together. "Mr. McKinnon Yates, I wanted to talk to you about my situation here." His expression grew guarded. "You're not comfortable. If there's something the cabin needs, the cabin is perfect," she interrupted. "That's not it at all. I'm very grateful for everything you've done for Emma and me." She took another steadying breath. "But I can't continue to live on your charity. I need to earn my keep." Relief flickered across his face. "Mrs. Fairchild, Dahlia," she said. "If I'm to call you Yates, then please call me Dahlia." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Dahlia, then. You don't need to earn your keep. What I did wasn't with the expectation of getting labor in return." "I understand that," she said earnestly. "And I respect it all the more for that reason, but I need to work for myself as much as for you. I'm not used to sitting idle and—" She gestured around the room. "Mrs. Gunderson mentioned you might be able to use some help with mending and gardening. I'm good with a needle, and I grew up tending vegetables." Yates studied her for a long moment, and she fought the urge to fidget under his gaze. His eyes were the color of the sky just before dusk, not quite blue, not quite gray. "If it would make you feel better," he said finally, "I won't say no to the help. Mrs. Gunderson does what she can, but she's got other households to tend to as well. And I admit, I've never had much of a hand with growing things that aren't cattle." Relief washed over Dahlia. "Thank you. I'll start tomorrow if that's all right," he nodded. "There's a kitchen garden out back that's gone mostly to weeds, and I've got a pile of shirts that could use attention." "I'll take care of both," she promised, turning to go. At the door, she paused. "Yates, thank you not just for this, but for understanding why I needed to ask." Something warm flickered in his eyes. "Good night, Dahlia. Good night." As she walked back to her cabin in the gathering darkness, Dahlia felt lighter than she had in weeks. She still grieved for Thomas, still worried about the future, but for the first time since his death, she felt as though she might find her footing again. The next morning, Dahlia rose with the sun, fed Emma, and tucked her into a sling across her chest. She made her way to the overgrown kitchen garden behind Yates's house, finding it in worse shape than she'd imagined. Weeds had choked out most of the vegetables, though she could see a few stubborn tomato plants and some scraggly herbs fighting for survival. Rolling up her sleeves, she set to work clearing the weeds from one section, careful not to disturb Emma, who had fallen back asleep against her chest. The physical labor felt good after days of inactivity, and she lost herself in the rhythm of the work. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Yates's approach until his shadow fell across the patch of ground she was clearing. "You've been at it for hours," he said, concern evident in his voice. "You should take a break before you wear yourself out." Dahlia sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of the sweat dampening her dress and the ache in her muscles. "I didn't realize how much time had passed." Yates offered her a canteen. "Water." She accepted it gratefully, taking a long drink. "Thank you. The garden's in worse shape than I expected." My fault entirely, he admitted. Never had much interest in vegetables. He glanced down at Emma, who was beginning to stir. How's the little one taking to outdoor life? Dahlia smiled, adjusting the sling. She seems to enjoy the fresh air, sleeps better out here than she does in the cabin. A hint of a smile touched Yates's lips. Takes after her mother, I'd say. You seem more at ease with dirt under your fingernails. The observation surprised her, not just that he'd noticed, but that he was right. I grew up on a farm, she explained. My father grew cotton mainly, but we always had a big vegetable garden. My mother died when I was young, so I took over much of her work. Yates nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've got to ride out and check on a section of fence that needs mending, but I wanted to let you know that Mrs. Gunderson left dinner for both of us. It's keeping warm on the stove. Oh, I couldn't, please, he interrupted gently. It would be a waste to let it go uneaten, and it might be nice to have company for a meal. A faint flush colored his tanned cheeks. Unless you'd prefer to eat in your cabin, which I would understand completely. Dahlia found herself wanting to ease his obvious discomfort. Dinner together would be nice, she said. What time should I come over? I should be back by 6, he said, relief evident in his voice. Nothing fancy. Mrs. Gunderson doesn't believe in standing on ceremony. Neither do I, Dahlia assured him. I'll see you at 6. After he rode off, Dahlia continued working for another hour before heading back to her cabin to wash up and feed Emma. As she prepared for dinner, she found herself taking extra care with her appearance, pinning up her hair more neatly than usual and choosing her best dress, one of the few possessions she'd been allowed to keep. It's just dinner, she told herself firmly. A simple meal with the man who's given you shelter. Nothing more. But as she made her way to the main house at 6 o'clock, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms, Dahlia couldn't quite quell the flutter of nervous anticipation in her stomach. Yates was waiting on the porch, freshly washed and changed from his work clothes. He stood as she approached, and she noticed he'd trimmed his beard as well. Right on time, he said, holding the door for her. I hope you're hungry, Mrs. Gunderson seems to think I need feeding up. She always leaves enough for 3 men. The kitchen was warm and filled with the savory scent of beef stew. Yates had set the table with 2 plates and a mismatched set of cutlery. A loaf of fresh bread sat in the center, alongside a crock of butter. It's not much compared to town dining, but Mrs. Gunderson makes the best stew in the territory, Yates said, pulling out a chair for her. It smells wonderful, Dahlia replied, settling Emma's sleeping form in her lap. And I haven't had a proper meal at a table since. Her voice trailed off as the memory of her last dinner with Thomas surfaced. Understanding crossed Yates's face. Would you like me to hold the little one while you eat? Might be easier. Dahlia hesitated, then carefully passed Emma to him. To her surprise, he handled the baby with practiced ease, cradling her securely in the crook of his arm. You've held babies before, she observed as he settled into his chair, balancing Emma expertly. A shadow passed over his face. My sister had 4. I used to help her when her husband was away on cattle drives. Used to? Dahlia asked, sensing there was more to the story. Yates's expression grew distant. They moved to California 3 years ago. Better opportunities out west, she said. He shrugged. We right, but it's not the same. You miss them, Dahlia said softly. Every day. He looked down at Emma, his expression softening. Her youngest was about this age when they left. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the stew every bit as delicious as promised. Yates managed to eat one-handed while holding Emma, who slept peacefully throughout the meal. I noticed you've cleared quite a section of the garden already, Yates said eventually. I'm afraid it's a bit late in the season for planting much. There's still time for some fall crops, Dahlia replied. Greens, turnips, maybe some late carrots, and we can prepare the soil for next spring." Yates raised an eyebrow. Dahlia felt her cheeks warm. "I mean, if I'm still. That is, I don't want to presume." "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," Yates said quietly. "The cabin is yours for the winter and beyond if you want it." Relief and something more complex washed over her. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without your help." Yates's eyes met hers across the table. "You'd have managed," he said with surprising conviction. "You're stronger than you know, Dahlia Fairchild." The way he said her name sent an unexpected shiver through her. For a heartbeat, neither spoke, the air between them charged with something Dahlia wasn't ready to name. The moment broke when Emma stirred and began to fuss. Dahlia reached for her, and their fingers brushed as Yates passed the baby back. The brief contact sent a jolt of awareness through her that she immediately tried to suppress. "I should get her back to the cabin," Dahlia said, rising from her chair. "Thank you for dinner and for—" She gestured to Emma. Yates stood as well. "I enjoyed the company," he said simply. "Both of yours." He walked her to the door, opening it for her. The night had grown cool and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I'll walk you back," Yates offered. "There's no need," Dahlia protested. "It's just across the yard." "Humor me," he said with a small smile. "My mother raised me to see a lady safely home, even if it's only 100 yards." They walked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of their boots on the gravel path and Emma's soft breathing. At the cabin door, Dahlia turned to thank him again. "Would you like to do this again?" Yates asked suddenly. "Dinner, I mean, maybe once or twice a week. It gets quiet eating alone all the time." The request was so earnest, so free of any ulterior motive that Dahlia found herself nodding. "I'd like that. It gets quiet for me too." Something like happiness flickered in Yates's eyes. "Good, that's good. Sleep well, Dahlia. You too, Yates." As she closed the cabin door behind her, Dahlia pressed her back against it, Emma cradled against her chest. Her heart was beating too quickly, and she wasn't entirely sure why. "You're being foolish," she told herself firmly. "He's being kind, nothing more. Your husband's barely cold in his grave." But as she prepared for bed, she couldn't quite shake the memory of Yates's gentle hands cradling her daughter, or the way his eyes had softened when they met hers across the table. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Dahlia spent her mornings working in the garden, which was slowly transforming under her care. She'd planted what late crops she could, and was preparing the rest for spring planting. In the afternoons, she'd bring in Emma and work on mending Yates's clothes, which needed considerable attention. Twice a week, they shared dinner in the main house, sometimes with Mrs. Gunderson joining them, but often just the two of them with Emma. Dahlia found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit. Yates was a surprisingly good conversationalist once his initial reserve melted away, and she enjoyed drawing him out on various subjects. She learned that he'd come west from Pennsylvania after the war, working cattle drives before saving enough to buy his small spread 5 years ago. He read voraciously history and poetry mostly, and had strong opinions about territorial politics. In turn, she told him about growing up in Missouri, her dreams of becoming a school teacher before she'd met Thomas, her hopes for Emma's future. As October gave way to November, the weather turned colder. One morning, Dahlia woke to find the first frost had transformed the prairie into a glittering wonderland. She wrapped Emma warmly and ventured out to check on her garden, relieved to see the row covers she'd fashioned had protected the late plantings. As she worked, she became aware of raised voices coming from the direction of the main house. Curious, she straightened up and saw Yates standing on his porch, engaged in what appeared to be a heated conversation with a visitor on horseback. The stranger was well-dressed, his horse a fine-looking animal that spoke of wealth. Something about his bearing seemed vaguely familiar, though Dahlia couldn't place him from this distance. The conversation ended abruptly, with the stranger wheeling his horse around and galloping off down the drive. Yates remained on the porch, his posture rigid with what looked like anger. Dahlia hesitated, unsure whether to approach or pretend she hadn't noticed the confrontation. Before she could decide, Yates spotted her and raised a hand in greeting. Taking this as an invitation, she made her way toward the house, Emma secure in her sling. "Everything all right?" she asked as she reached the porch steps. Yates's expression was troubled. "That was Edward Blackburn," he said. "Thomas's former business partner." Dahlia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frosty morning. "What did he want?" Yates hesitated, as if debating how much to tell her. "He claims Thomas owed him money from their last cattle venture. Says since the bank's been paid, you should be working off the rest of the debt to him." Anger flashed through Dahlia. "That's ridiculous. Thomas kept meticulous records. If he'd owed Mr. Blackburn money, it would have been noted in his ledger." "That's what I told him," Yates agreed. "I also reminded him that you're not property to be traded for debts, legitimate or otherwise." "How did he even know I was here?" "Word gets around," Yates said grimly. "Muskogee's not that big, and what happened at that auction wasn't exactly private." Dahlia shivered, clutching Emma closer. "Do you think he'll be back?" Yates's expression hardened. "If he is, he'll find I'm not as easy to intimidate as he might hope." His tone softened as he looked at her worried face. "Don't fret, Dahlia. You're safe here." She nodded, wanting to believe him, but a sense of unease had settled over her. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt vulnerable again. Yates seemed to sense her disquiet. "Come inside for some coffee," he suggested. "It's too cold to be working in the garden anyway." The kitchen was warm, the stove radiating heat that chased away the morning chill. Yates busied himself preparing coffee while Dahlia settled at the table, unwrapping Emma from her layers. "She's growing fast," Yates observed, setting a steaming cup before Dahlia. "Getting to look more like you every day." Dahlia smiled despite her lingering worry. "She has her father's chin, though, and his appetite." A comfortable silence fell between them as they sipped their coffee. Finally, Dahlia spoke the question that had been troubling her since Blackburn's visit. "Yates, do you think he could make legal trouble about Thomas's supposed debt?" Yates considered the question seriously. "I don't know," he admitted. "The law can be flexible out here, depending on who has the judge's ear, but I've got some influence too. Sheriff Johnson and I go back a ways." "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," Dahlia said quietly. "You've already done so much for us." Yates's hand covered hers on the table, warm and calloused. "Listen to me, Dahlia. You and Emma are not a burden, having you here these past weeks." He paused, seeming to search for words. "The place feels more alive. I didn't realize how empty it was until you filled it." The simple honesty of his words took her breath away. Without thinking, she turned her hand beneath his, their palms meeting, fingers intertwining. "I feel safe here," she confessed softly. "For the first time since Thomas died." Something shifted in Yates's expression, a softening around his eyes, a slight parting of his lips. For a heart-stopping moment, Dahlia thought he might lean across the table and kiss her. Part of her, a part she'd been trying to ignore, hoped he would. The moment shattered as Emma let out a hungry wail. Dahlia withdrew her hand reluctantly, gathering her daughter into her arms. "I should feed her," she said, a flush rising to her cheeks. Yates nodded, standing abruptly. "Of course, I need to check on the herd anyway. This early cold snap has them restless." He paused at the door, looking back at her. "Dahlia, lock your door tonight, just as a precaution." After he left, Dahlia pressed a kiss to Emma's downy head, her emotions in turmoil. The attraction she felt toward Yates was becoming harder to deny, but guilt nagged at her. Thomas had been dead barely 2 months. Was it disloyal to be developing feelings for another man so soon? And yet, life on the frontier was brutal and short. People remarried quickly out of necessity. A woman alone with a child had few options for survival. But that wasn't why her heart quickened when Yates smiled at her, or why she found herself watching for him from her window each evening as he returned from checking his herd. "What am I going to do, little one?" she whispered to Emma, who gazed back with solemn eyes that seemed too knowing for her tender age. That night, as instructed, Dahlia locked her cabin door. But as she lay in bed listening to the wind whistling around the eaves, she found herself wishing for the security of Yates's presence just a little closer than across the yard. The threat from Blackburn materialized sooner than expected. 3 days after his visit to the ranch, Dahlia was in Muskogee with Yates, purchasing supplies for the coming winter. It was her first trip to town since the auction, and she was nervous about facing the townspeople's curiosity. Yates had been solicitous, driving her in his wagon and staying close as they moved from the general store to the apothecary. Most people were polite if reserved, though Dahlia caught whispers and speculative glances following them down the street. They were loading their purchases into the wagon when a smooth voice called out, "Mrs. Fairchild, what a pleasant surprise." Dahlia turned to find Edward Blackburn approaching, impeccably dressed as always in a suit that must have come from back east. Beside her, she felt Yates tense. "Mr. Blackburn," she acknowledged coolly. "I've been meaning to call on you," Blackburn said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy, "to discuss the matter of your late husband's obligations. Mrs. Fairchild has no business with you," Yates said firmly, stepping slightly in front of Dahlia. Blackburn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I believe that's for the lady to decide, McKinnon." He turned back to Dahlia. "Your husband and I had a verbal agreement regarding our last venture. He borrowed against his portion of the profits, which were unfortunately lost when he was so tragically killed." "Thomas never mentioned any such agreement," Dahlia replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Naturally, he wouldn't want to worry you in your delicate condition," Blackburn said smoothly, his gaze dropping briefly to Emma. "Nevertheless, the debt exists, $200 to be precise." "If such a debt existed, why wasn't it brought to the bank's attention during the estate settlement?" Yates challenged. Blackburn's expression hardened. "I was away on business. By the time I returned, I discovered McKinnon here had already acquired your services." His emphasis on the word made Dahlia's skin crawl. "But it's not too late to set things right. I'm prepared to assume the debt in exchange for your household skills at my ranch. I've recently built a new home and find myself in need of someone to manage it. Mrs. Fairchild isn't for sale or trade," Yates said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And if you had any legitimate claim, you would take it to the judge, not accost a widow in the street." By now, their confrontation had drawn attention. Several townspeople had stopped to watch, including Sheriff Johnson, who was making his way toward them with a concerned expression. "Everything all right here?" the sheriff asked, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Just a business discussion, Sheriff," Blackburn replied smoothly. "Looks finished to me," Johnson observed. "Mrs. Fairchild, Yates, you heading back to the ranch?" "Yes, Sheriff, we were just leaving," Yates confirmed, helping Dahlia up onto the wagon seat. Blackburn's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, McKinnon. The lady has obligations that need settling." "The only obligation Mrs. Fairchild has is to her daughter," Yates replied evenly. "Good day, Blackburn. As they drove away, Dahlia released the breath she'd been holding. He's not going to give up, is he? Yates's hands were tight on the reins. No, I don't believe he is, but neither am I. The ride back to the ranch was tense, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the turnoff to the ranch, Dahlia finally broke the silence. You think he was telling the truth about Thomas owing him money? Yates considered the question carefully before answering. I can't say for certain. Your husband was an honest man in my experience, but business arrangements can be complicated. If there is a real debt, if there is, we'll handle it properly through legal channels, Yates assured her. But something about this doesn't sit right. Blackburn's too eager to get you under his roof, instead of simply collecting money. The implications made Dahlia shudder. Blackburn had always been overly attentive during the few social occasions when they'd met, his gaze lingering too long, standing too close when Thomas wasn't nearby. I'd rather work for 10 years to pay off a real debt than spend one day in that man's house, she said with sudden vehemence. Yates glanced at her, surprise and something like approval in his expression. You won't have to do either, he promised. I gave my word that you'd be safe with me, and I mean to keep it. That evening after dinner, as Dahlia was preparing to return to her cabin, Yates cleared his throat nervously. I've been thinking, he began, about the situation with Blackburn. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. It might be better if you and Emma moved into the main house for a while. There's a spare bedroom upstairs that no one's using. Dahlia felt her cheeks warm. Yates, I couldn't. People would talk. People already are talking, he pointed out gently. And I'm more concerned with your safety than gossip. The main house is sturdier, and I'd feel better having you under the same roof if Blackburn decides to cause trouble. She knew he was right, but the prospect of living under the same roof with him brought a host of complicated feelings to the surface. What about propriety? Yates's expression was earnest. Mrs. Gunderson can stay over when she comes, if that would make you more comfortable. And I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will be safe with me. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. I know that, she said softly. I've never doubted your honor, Yates. Their eyes met, and Dahlia felt that same pull she'd experienced in the kitchen days earlier. This time, it was she who looked away first. I'll think about it, she promised. That night, as a fierce November wind howled around the cabin, rattling the shutters and seeping through every crack, Dahlia made her decision. It wasn't just about safety, though that was certainly a factor. It was about facing the truth of her growing feelings for Yates McKinnon, feelings that both frightened and exhilarated her. The next morning, she packed her and Emma's few belongings and moved into the main house. Life in the main house developed its own rhythm. Dahlia took over more of the domestic duties from Mrs. Gunderson, who seemed relieved to have fewer responsibilities. Together they cleaned the house from top to bottom, Dahlia discovering a satisfaction in making the sparse rooms more comfortable and homelike. With Mrs. Gunderson's blessing, she rearranged furniture, hung curtains made from fabric purchased in town, and added small touches that transformed the bachelor dwelling into something approaching a home. Yates watched these changes with a mixture of amusement and what looked like contentment, offering no objections even when she moved his books from haphazard piles into neat shelves. Their evenings took on a domestic quality that Dahlia found surprisingly comforting. After Emma was put to bed in the small adjoining room off Dahlia's bedroom, she and Yates would sit by the fire in the main room, she with her mending or knitting, he with a book or his ledgers. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in companionable silence, but always there was an undercurrent of awareness between them. As November turned to December, the weather grew harsher. Snow fell frequently, blanketing the prairie in white. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures closer to the barn, and Yates spent long hours ensuring their survival through the bitter cold. One evening, he returned later than usual, his clothes crusted with ice, his face raw from the wind. Dahlia had been watching anxiously from the window, relief flooding through her when she finally spotted him riding toward the house. "You're half frozen," she scolded gently, helping him out of his coat. "Sit by the fire while I make you some hot coffee." Yates obeyed without argument, a sign of just how tired and cold he truly was. When she returned with the steaming mug, she found him slumped in his chair, eyes closed, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "Here," she said, pressing the mug into his hands. "Drink this." Dinner's keeping warm on the stove. His fingers were like ice against hers. Impulsively, she captured his hands between her own, rubbing them gently to restore circulation. "You'll make yourself ill, pushing so hard," she murmured. Yates's eyes opened, watching her face as she chafed his hands. "Worth it," he said simply. "Lost only 2 head today instead of a dozen." Dahlia shook her head, torn between exasperation and admiration for his dedication. "At least wear the gloves I mended for you. Your hands are like blocks of ice." A small smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam." She realized she was still holding his hands and started to pull away, but Yates tightened his grip slightly, keeping her there. "Dahlia," he said, his voice rough with something more than just cold and fatigue. "Having you here these past weeks, it's meant more to me than I can say." Her heart began to race, and she found it suddenly difficult to meet his gaze. "I'm glad we could help each other," she said carefully. "It's more than that." Yates sat up straighter, still holding her hands. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas, and I would never presume to. That is, I don't expect." He was rarely at a loss for words, and his obvious struggle to express himself touched her deeply. "Yates," she said softly, "what are you trying to say?" He took a deep breath. "I'm saying that I care for you, Dahlia, more than I should, perhaps. More than I intended to, and not just out of duty to Thomas or concern for your welfare." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "I understand if you don't feel the same or if it's too soon. I just needed you to know." Emotion welled up in Dahlia's throat, making speech impossible for a moment. The feelings she'd been trying to suppress, to deny out of loyalty to Thomas's memory, surged to the surface. "I care for you too," she whispered finally. "And that frightens me." Hope flickered in Yates's eyes. "Why does it frighten you?" "Because Thomas has been gone such a short time. Because I don't know if what I feel is real or just gratitude. Because I'm afraid of depending on someone again, only to lose them." The words tumbled out, fears she hadn't fully acknowledged even to herself. Yates released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "I can't promise that nothing will ever happen to me," he said honestly. "Life out here is too uncertain for such guarantees. But I can promise that as long as I draw breath, I'll do everything in my power to protect you and Emma, to be worthy of your trust." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "And I can wait, Dahlia, for as long as you need." She leaned into his touch, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know how long that will be." "It doesn't matter," he said simply. "Some things are worth waiting for." The tenderness in his voice undid her last reservations. Dahlia leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, chaste, but filled with promise. When she pulled back, Yates's expression was one of wonder and barely contained joy. "I've wanted to do that since the first night you had dinner here," he confessed, a smile spreading across his face. Dahlia felt herself blushing. "I've wanted you to," she admitted. From upstairs came the sound of Emma beginning to fuss. Dahlia reluctantly pulled her hands from Yates's. "She's hungry," she explained, rising to her feet. Yates nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Go to her, we have time." As Dahlia climbed the stairs to tend to her daughter, her heart felt lighter than it had in months. The guilt she'd expected to feel at this first step away from her grief was present but muted, overshadowed by a tentative hope for the future. The truce with Blackburn lasted through the holidays. Christmas at the ranch was a quiet but joyful affair, with Mrs. Gunderson joining them for a special dinner. Yates surprised Dahlia with a beautiful shawl purchased from a traveling peddler, while she gifted him with a new shirt she had sewn secretly during the long evenings. Their relationship progressed slowly, respectful of her mourning and the watchful eyes of the community. Kisses were stolen in private moments, hands found each other beneath the table during meals, and conversations grew deeper, more intimate, as they shared their hopes and fears. January brought the harshest weather of the winter, biting cold and blizzards that kept them housebound for days at a time. Yates continued to sleep downstairs, while Dahlia and Emma occupied the upstairs bedroom, but the enforced proximity only strengthened their growing bond. It was during one such blizzard, as howling winds rattled the windows and snow piled against the doors, that Dahlia finally spoke of her future. "I've been thinking," she said as they sat before the fire after Emma had been put to bed, "about what will happen when spring comes." Yates looked up from the book he'd been reading, his expression guarded. "Oh, my parents left me a small inheritance," she explained. "Not much, but enough to perhaps rent a small place in town, maybe start a dressmaking business. I've been saving the wages you've paid me as well." "I see," Yates said carefully. "You're planning to leave, then?" Dahlia heard the hurt beneath his neutral tone and hurried to clarify. "That's not what I meant at all. I was thinking about how I could contribute more if I were to stay." Hope flickered in his eyes. "If you were to stay." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Yates, these past months with you have been. I've found happiness here that I never expected to find again. Emma adores you, and I—" She faltered, then pressed on. "I've fallen in love with you." The book slipped from Yates's hands as he leaned forward, his expression intense. "Say that again." A smile tugged at Dahlia's lips. "I love you, Yates McKinnon." In one fluid motion, he moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "Dahlia Fairchild, I have loved you since the moment you stood in that garden with dirt on your hands and determination in your eyes." He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "I wanted to give you time to be sure, but I've been sure for months." Joy bubbled up within her, and she leaned down to kiss him properly, her hands framing his face. This kiss was different from their previous ones, deeper, more certain, a promise rather than a question. When they finally parted, both breathing more rapidly, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Let me be a father to Emma. Let us be a family." Tears of happiness spilled down Dahlia's cheeks. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes." They agreed to marry in the spring, when travel would be easier for those they wished to invite. But their engagement remained their secret for the time being, a private joy they nursed through the remainder of the harsh winter. As March arrived, bringing the first tentative signs of spring, they finally shared their news with Mrs. Gunderson, who responded with delighted approval and immediately began planning what food to serve at the wedding. Their happiness, however, was short-lived. The thaw that made the roads passable again also brought Edward Blackburn back into their lives. He arrived at the ranch unannounced one afternoon while Yates was out checking on new calves. Dahlia was hanging laundry in the yard, Emma playing on a blanket nearby, when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Her first thought was that Yates had returned early, but as the rider came into view, her heart sank. Blackburn was impeccably dressed as always, but there was something different about him today, a hardness in his expression that sent a chill through her. "Mrs. Fairchild," he called, dismounting with fluid grace. "You're looking well. Domesticity becomes you." Dahlia moved to stand between him and Emma. "Mr. Blackburn, Yates isn't here." "I'm aware," he replied smoothly. "I waited until I saw him ride out toward the north pasture. I thought we might have a private conversation." Alarm bells rang in Dahlia's mind. She glanced toward the main house, wondering if she could reach it before him if she needed to run. "I have nothing to say to you," she said firmly. "If you have business matters to discuss, you can speak with Yates when he returns." Blackburn's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My business is with you, my dear. I've been patient, but my patience has limits. I've come to collect what's owed me." "Nothing is owed to you," Dahlia replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "If Thomas had any legitimate debts, they would have been settled during the estate proceedings." "So righteous," Blackburn murmured, taking a step closer. "So certain of your dead husband's honesty. Did you never wonder why he was carrying so little money when his body was found? The cattle sale should have netted him over $1,000. Doubt flickered briefly in Dahlia's mind, but she pushed it aside. The money was stolen when he was killed. Blackburn laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humor. "Is that what McKinnon told you? How convenient for him." "What are you implying?" Dahlia demanded, even as she scooped Emma up from the blanket, holding her protectively. "Only that your gallant rescuer might not be as noble as he appears." Blackburn took another step forward. "Did you never question why he was so eager to pay off Thomas's debts? Why he brought you to his isolated ranch rather than helping you establish yourself in town?" "Yates is a good man," Dahlia insisted. "He was Thomas's friend." "Was he?" Blackburn's voice dripped with insinuation. "Then perhaps you should ask him where he was the night Thomas was killed. Ask him about the argument they had in Kansas City before Thomas started for home." Dahlia felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I?" Blackburn's smile widened. "Ask him yourself. But in the meantime, I've come to offer you a choice, Mrs. Fairchild. Come work for me as my housekeeper just for 1 year to settle Thomas's debt, or I'll go to the sheriff with what I know about McKinnon's whereabouts the night your husband died." Emma began to cry, sensing her mother's distress. Dahlia bounced her gently, trying to calm both the child and herself. "I don't believe you," she said with more confidence than she felt. "And I won't be blackmailed." Blackburn's expression hardened. "Then perhaps I'll just take what I'm owed." He reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded document. "This is a promissory note signed by Thomas. It gives me the right to claim collateral against his debt. I've had it properly registered with the territorial court." Dahlia stared at the paper he thrust toward her, recognizing with a sinking heart what appeared to be Thomas's signature at the bottom. "Even if that were real," she said, "it would give you claim to property, not people. I am not collateral." "The law might see things differently," Blackburn replied, "especially when the alternative is a murder investigation." The threat hung in the air between them. Dahlia clutched Emma tighter, her mind racing. She didn't believe for a moment that Yates had anything to do with Thomas's death, but the mere suggestion could destroy his reputation, perhaps even lead to his arrest if Blackburn was persuasive enough with the authorities. Before she could formulate a response, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Yates was returning, and he wasn't alone. Sheriff Johnson rode beside him, both men spurring their horses when they spotted Blackburn. Relief washed over Dahlia, followed quickly by anxiety. What if there was some truth to Blackburn's accusations? No, she refused to believe it. She knew Yates not just his words, but his character, revealed in 100 small ways over the months they'd spent together. "Blackburn," Yates called as he dismounted, his voice cold with controlled anger. "You're trespassing." "Actually, I'm conducting business," Blackburn replied smoothly, though Dahlia noticed he took a step back. "Mrs. Fairchild and I were just discussing her husband's outstanding debts." "That's so?" Sheriff Johnson asked, approaching with his hand resting casually on his holster. "Funny thing about debts, they usually come with paperwork. The bank didn't seem to have any record of Thomas Fairchild owing you money when I checked last week." Blackburn's expression flickered with surprise before he regained his composure. "I have documentation right here," he said, holding up the promissory note. "Signed by Thomas himself." The sheriff took the paper, examining it carefully. "Interesting. Looks like it's dated just 2 weeks before Thomas died." "That's right," Blackburn confirmed. "Our last business arrangement." "Must have slipped Thomas's mind when he updated his ledger the same day," Johnson said conversationally, "since there's no mention of it there." Dahlia felt a surge of hope. "You found Thomas's ledger?" Johnson nodded. "Yates here suggested I check with the bank again." Turns out Thomas had left it in their safe deposit box before heading to Kansas City. Makes for interesting reading. Blackburn's face had gone pale. "This is absurd. That promissory note is legal and binding." "Maybe," Johnson allowed. "Or maybe it's a forgery." "Either way, I think a judge will want to look at it alongside the ledger." He folded the paper and tucked it into his vest pocket. "In the meantime, Mr. Blackburn, I believe you were just leaving." For a moment, it seemed Blackburn might protest, but a glance at Yates's thunderous expression apparently changed his mind. "This isn't over," he said, mounting his horse with less grace than before. "The territorial court will hear about this." "Looking forward to it," Johnson replied calmly. "I'm sure they'll be real interested in some of the other information that's come to light, too." Once Blackburn had ridden away, Dahlia's legs nearly buckled with relief. Yates was immediately at her side, his arm supporting her, his face tight with concern. "Are you all right? Did he threaten you?" She nodded weakly. "He said. He implied that you had something to do with Thomas's death, that you were there when it happened." Pain flickered across Yates's face. "I thought he might try something like that." "Is it true?" she asked, hating the question even as it left her lips. "Not the way he meant it," Yates answered honestly. "I was in Kansas City at the same time as Thomas. We did argue about him traveling back alone with so much money. I offered to ride with him, but he was eager to get back to you." Regret filled his eyes. "I followed a day behind, worried about him. Found him about halfway back. He was already gone." Sheriff Johnson stepped forward. "Yates came straight to me, Dahlia. Helped me track the killers, a gang that had been hitting travelers along that route. We caught them 2 weeks later." "Why didn't you tell me?" Dahlia asked Yates, emotion thickening her voice. "At first, it didn't seem important. You had enough grief to bear without those details," he replied. "Later, I was afraid you'd think I could have prevented it somehow if I'd been faster or more insistent about riding with him." Dahlia shifted Emma to one arm so she could touch Yates's face. "I would never have blamed you. Thomas was always too proud, too sure of himself." Yates covered her hand with his own. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything. I thought I was protecting you, but secrets have a way of coming back to haunt you." "No more secrets," she said firmly, "from either of us." Sheriff Johnson cleared his throat. "I'll be heading back to town now. Don't worry about Blackburn. Between the ledger and some other complaints that have surfaced, he'll have enough legal troubles to keep him occupied for quite some time." After the sheriff departed, Yates gathered Dahlia and Emma into his arms, holding them as if he might never let go. "I was so afraid when I saw him here with you," he murmured into her hair. "If anything had happened." "Nothing happened," she assured him, leaning into his strength. "We're safe, all of us." That evening, after Emma was asleep, They sat before the fire as had become their custom. But tonight was different. The air cleared of secrets, the last shadow lifted from their happiness. "I was thinking," Yates said, taking Dahlia's hand, "about the wedding." She smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "What about it? I think we've waited long enough." His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "The apple trees will be blooming in a couple of weeks. I can't think of a prettier backdrop for a spring wedding." Dahlia's heart swelled with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. 2 weeks sounds perfect," she agreed, tilting her face up for his kiss. 2 Sundays later, Dahlia stood beneath the blooming apple trees beside the house, wildflowers in her hair and Emma in her arms, as she pledged her life to Yates McKinnon. The small gathering of friends, Mrs. Gunderson, Sheriff Johnson, the ranch hands, and a few townspeople who had stood by them watched with approving smiles as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the minister told Yates, who needed no further encouragement. His kiss was tender yet possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. When they parted, he took Emma into his arms, the child reaching happily for the man who had already become her father in every way that mattered. "Mrs. McKinnon," he said softly, savoring the sound of her new name. "Mr. McKinnon," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness. "Shall we greet our guests?" The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing in the yard, lanterns strung from tree branches casting a warm glow over the festivities. As dusk fell, Yates pulled Dahlia away from the gathering, leading her to a quiet spot beneath the largest apple tree. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. Inside, Dahlia found a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "It's beautiful," she whispered, opening it to find a tiny portrait of Emma on one side and a lock of fine baby hair on the other. "I had it made in Tulsa," Yates explained, "so you could keep her close to your heart always." Tears of joy welled in Dahlia's eyes. "Help me put it on." Yates fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "There's something else," he said. "I've been saving this for the right moment." From his other pocket, he withdrew an envelope and handed it to her. Inside was a deed to the ranch, now bearing both their names. "I want there to be no doubt," Yates said earnestly. "Everything I have is yours. This place, my heart, my life, they all belong to you and Emma now." Dahlia could only respond by pulling him down for a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express. Later that night, after the guests had departed, and Emma was asleep in the nursery that had once been Dahlia's room, husband and wife retired to what was now their shared bedroom. There, in the soft glow of lamplight, they consummated their marriage with tender passion, each discovery a new delight, each touch a promise for the future. As they lay entwined afterward, Dahlia rested her head on Yates's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed softly. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." Yates's arms tightened around her. "When I saw you that day at the auction, standing so brave and alone, something inside me just knew. You were meant to be here with me. It seems impossible that something so terrible could lead to something so wonderful," she mused. "Life's like that sometimes," Yates replied, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Joy from sorrow, strength from weakness. Love from loss," Dahlia added, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Love from loss," he agreed. "But no more losses for us, my love. Only gains from here forward." As if in answer to his words, 9 months later, Dahlia gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named James Thomas McKinnon. Emma, now nearly 2, was enchanted with her little brother, constantly wanting to help care for him. The years that followed brought more children. Twin girls, Sarah and Lily, arrived 2 years after James and prosperity to the McKinnon ranch. Yates's careful management and Dahlia's contributions, particularly her successful vegetable garden that eventually supplied produce to several businesses in town, allowed them to expand their holdings and build a larger home for their growing family. Edward Blackburn, convicted of fraud and other crimes, eventually left the territory after serving a short prison sentence. The scandal had cost him his business and standing in the community, a fitting end to his attempts to control Dahlia's fate. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Dahlia took Yates's hand in hers. "You ever think about that day?" she asked. "At the auction?" Yates squeezed her fingers gently. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how close I came to being late. My horse threw a shoe on the way to town. If I hadn't made it in time." "But you did," Dahlia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You came and said those words that changed everything. You're coming home." "Best words I ever spoke," Yates murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because that's what you are to me, Dahlia McKinnon. You're my home." As the setting sun bathed the prairie in golden light, their children's laughter filling the air around them, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, not just in this place, but in the heart of the man beside her, the man who had bid everything to make her his own.